Welcome, viewers, to day 24 of the 5th annual Video-a-Day Debruary program. Our theme for this year, Winning at Life, addresses dozens of ways to improve yourself, your behavior, your outlook, and everything else to make you a true winner in 2022. Now, we've all heard the term inner child, but what exactly does it mean? And how can your inner child be hard at work keeping you from winning? That's a big question on the minds of many. We have our guest today that's going to answer that for you. You may think of yourself as a mature adult because you're over a certain age, but in reality, most adults carry some wounded trauma from their childhood. Usually we don't really pay much attention to it because we cover it up by people pleasing. In some cases, on the opposite side, we have people that gaslight and do other kinds of horrible behaviors, lie and pretend and use people. But our guest tonight, Amie Dean, is a certified clinical trauma counselor and an Ascension Coach, which I'm going to ask her what that is. Through her Awakened Living coaching community, she helps ambitious, conscious women struggling with self-criticism and not feeling good enough to heal their inner child wounds. By healing, you can live an authentic, spiritually awakened life true to your soul's mission. So join me in welcoming Amie Dean to Debruary 2022. Hey, Amie.
Hello, and it's actually Amie, but that's okay. I've gotten that before, so that is perfectly fine. But it's Amie Dean.
I am so sorry. I'm blind. I don't have my glasses on.
That's okay. No problem. That's so funny. I've actually gotten that before because it's not a very typical spelling for Amie, so it makes sense. Yes.
But now that I'm looking at it, squinting, yes.
Okay.
Oh, this is so embarrassing.
Yeah.
So anyway, Amie, let's start by explaining what the term inner child means, because all the other conversation we're going to have is going to be based on, discussing that, but we need to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Absolutely. So I would like to give an example to really pinpoint what or who your inner child is. And I think one way of looking at it is, and I think you said it perfectly earlier, that we all have trauma. And as we grow up, this trauma doesn't necessarily mean that even if we've tried to heal it, it doesn't mean we've healed it at the root. Therefore, we can have some residual trauma. And even if we know that we're adults and we are, in the world as adults, we typically have this kind of background persona, we'll say. And your inner child is a separate, but also a connected part of you. And your inner child, one way of thinking of this is that she is that younger you that has stored all your memories, all your experiences, good, bad, and neutral. And she tends to be the carrier of what I call your core wounds. And your core wounds are the emotional baggage, we can say. And that would be beliefs that are connected to the memories that you've struggled with. And this emotional baggage becomes these core wounds, such as an abandonment wound, if you were not given the love that you really deserved as a child, or a loss wound of some sort, or a shame wound, and maybe you feel like I'm not good enough. So there's so many ways that these wounds show up in our everyday lives, but these wounds tend to attach to our inner child because our inner child is so innocent and so playful and so loving. These are her natural qualities within us. If you want to think of this inner child as being just a visual of who you were as a child, it's that first image that pops up in your head. And she is carrying a lot, so many burdens, and also some beautiful things too, right? Like that innocence that I spoke about. And it's these wounds that she carries that creates the stress and the strain in our everyday lives, because they usually go undetected. And we don't know that we're having an inner child wound trigger in our adult life until, let's say, somebody says something in a relationship, or you're having a conflict with a spouse or a friend, or a work conflict has come up, and you start to feel really, really, really bad in comparison to the situation. So it could be a huge amount of shame, right, by just saying the wrong thing. It could be, this kind of emotional reaction that comes out of nowhere. And in that moment, it almost feels like, wait, where did that come from? That was really, a lot of anger, or that was a lot of sadness.
Mm,
And we might not understand how that arises within us, but it's our inner child that is
interesting.
in the background. Yeah, hanging out in the background, carrying these emotions. So that's a brief
So
introduction.
if someone,
Yeah.
it sounds like we all have these things in us, of course, varying degrees and different types. How would
Mhm.
somebody start to process that and figure out, just like the example you just gave, that reaction was kind of odd.
Yeah.
Was that an inner child? I mean, what are the strategies? What kind of things do you go through to figure that out? That's what's going on with you.
Yes. Oh, that's a great question. I would say, and to speak to what you mentioned earlier about the inner critic, right? That we can sometimes have an inner critic or a people pleaser. I believe you said that, or something to that
Hmm.
effect. That we have these different parts of us. And that's, I'll just add to that and say that these different parts of us are the protectors of the wounding. So they're the parts of us that have showed up to try to fix the problems and the emotions that we're feeling. So the work to heal the wounding and to actually not just heal, but permanently break through the wounding is to work with these direct protector parts of us. So that is the critic, that is the people pleaser that avoids conflict, maybe. Maybe for you, it is an overachiever that is constantly working or trying to do more and more, but it never feels like enough. So there's a lot of different ways this shows up, but we have to look at how are you showing up in the world first and foremost, because that tells me a lot. For example, do you have problems setting boundaries? That can tell me you have a protector part of you. That's a people pleaser. And that people pleaser is afraid that if for some reason, let's say something terrible happens and there's a relationship conflict. And in that relationship conflict, there's a breakup. And in that breakup, you start to feel all those fears and all the sadness that you felt as a young child when your parents maybe got a divorce, but it was never really dealt with or understood. But let's say they
Mm,
fought a lot and there was a lot of verbal, conflict between the two of them. And when you're in a conflict with your partner, you notice, for example, that you can't stand to be around the anger, or what you'll shut it down to, or do whatever you can to make sure that it doesn't escalate because it's fear of anger. And it's absolutely connected to just trying to protect ourselves. And so we have to work with understanding first, who are these parts of us? That's the first step. The second step is to have complete compassion for ourselves through this, because a lack of compassion and love is what caused the problem. And that's what actually resolves the problem as well.
interesting. So many people, I don't know what's the term. What would I say? They beat themselves up. They just
Yeah.
beat themselves up when there's something that they feel like they should have said or done differently than the way that they did. They start to pound on themselves, which of course just makes them feel worse. So, is that inner child stuff going on as well?
Yes, exactly. Yes. And so that would be your inner critic, for example, that would show up and self berate, right? And say, what's wrong with you? Why did you do that? Or why did you say that? And what's happening there is often that critic, even though it doesn't sound like it's a very helpful part of you, it really is, because this critic is basically here to protect you from making mistakes. Now, this part really wants you to not make mistakes. And the reason being is if you make mistakes, it's going to activate those inner child wounds. It's going to activate those times where you were wrong. Let's say a parent said you're bad or you're
Mm,
wrong, did something wrong. So it activates those wounds. And so this critic is trying to avoid that by helping you. It thinks it's helping you to stay on track. And sometimes the critic's been passed down from your parents, for example, and their parents. And you might hear your voice in your head is very similar to your parents' voice. And that's
that's
really,
terrible.
I know. It's tough. It is hard being human, but the good news is we can absolutely heal from this. It is not something that we have to be stuck in our whole lives. We just need to have some, self-awareness around it and just truly, first and foremost, it is all about compassion. And then from there, the deeper work can be done. And that's the next step. Yeah.
Do you find that there are like more some behaviors that are more common than others in say in relationships and marriages that stem from this wounded child? And if so, can you share a couple?
Well, that's a great question. I would say that so just to kind of rewind for a moment, everybody has an inner child and everyone has a wounded inner child. Everybody does. And even if you have not been through trauma, there's a wounded inner child in there because you've grown up in a society, this is one way of looking at it, in a society that has so many different beliefs and ideas about how you should be treated and how you should be seen in the world. And there's so many different perspectives. And so it's really confusing sometimes as a child. And so even if you did not have trauma, even if you consider yourself to have a pretty normal childhood, I see a lot of people that come to me and say, well, I didn't have anything difficult happen to me. And then as soon as we get down to it, we discover, wait a second, there are some things that happened, but it wasn't necessarily to them traumatic in the moment, such as, for example, being bullied. And maybe it was just a quick moment of being bullied, in second grade at recess time, for example. And they wouldn't think, right, that would create this wound, this shame around, let's say, their body image if they were bullied for being overweight as a child. And now they're constantly, let's say, monitoring their food or worried about, what they're eating, and they're often on dieting. So that one experience can create a whole cause of events, or cause and effect of events, yes, and can create this experience of just trying to avoid that forever if it was really deeply entrenched. And same with any kind of conflict, let's say, with divorce, if your parents were divorced or separated, or even if your parents are married, I find that no matter what, there's still a wound there. There's still
Yeah.
something, just part of our
Well, just because
human.
people are married doesn't mean it's a sane and sensible one. People
Yeah.
forget about that part.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. And
We wouldn't have so many divorces if all marriages were so wonderful.
yes, very true. Very, very true. So that I would say that's it overall. I can't say that there is one situation that would, lead to the wounding, but I can say that usually it's at least one, right? One kind of single incident experience. And then sometimes it can be rather complex for some people where they've had several different experiences that led to the core wound that is affecting
Gotcha.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a lot of people that come here who shared that they grew up in foster care,
Yeah.
and they share lots of things that I think would fall into into this category. I just never connected that dot. So let's
Yes.
talk about the healing part now. So we recognize what our problem
Mm.
is. We want to start healing.
Yes.
As you start to do that, are there going to be any particular
Mhm.
stumbling blocks or things that people typically encounter that might,
Yeah.
cause them a little additional trauma? I don't know what words I want to use, but I'm
Yeah.
thinking that this is not going to be some straight easy path. There's going to
No.
be some hurdles that they have to jump over, and
Ex-
even if they're on the right track, there has to be some stops and starts along the way. So,
Mm.
can you share what you've typically seen there?
Yes, absolutely. I would say so there's different pathways to healing your inner child. One pathway that I work with is in more of like a therapeutic context. So this is in the
Hmm.
therapy space. We work directly with just moving backwards in time and looking at your childhood and spending a considerable amount of time understanding your history and why things happened. And then we do, a little bit more of like a meditative visual journey to understand and to rewrite or rework the experiences of the past. So that's one way. And in that way, absolutely, because we're doing a lot of digging and going back in time, it can be triggering. But the way that I do this, and I'm actually, one thing about me is that I am a trauma therapist. So that makes a huge impact. I've had a lot of training around how to work with triggers as they arise. And so I don't really have them happen all that often
Oh,
within,
okay.
which is great. And then there's another pathway, which is through my coaching work that I do, this is so that it's available to everybody. And I also find that this tends to get to the root much quicker. And this is a spiritual psychology integration method. So I bring together something which is pretty esoteric, but it's something called the Akashic Records. And this is a space within us that is basically all encompassing of love. It is who we really are. It connects to our higher self, and it carries all of our soul's records. And that would be past, present, future, anything we've ever been through. We can access that
Oh,
within
boy.
ourselves to understand it. So that is the work that I do in the coaching world. And from there, we go much, much deeper. And we spend even more time getting to know who are these parts of you. We don't dive into your history as much. That's not a focus of coaching. But we spend more time on what's presently happening for you and what do you really want for the future. So we focus on the goals and what's possible. And it can be really exciting. And from there, triggers are close to none because we're not focusing on the past, if that makes sense, right? We're
Yeah, no,
just,
it does. Absolutely. Yeah, not digging up old stuff.
yes,
So tell me now, I was reading in your bio that you are an Ascension Coach.
yes,
What is
yes.
that? Where are we ascending to, Amie? I was sitting there going, hmm.
Yeah, exactly. What is this? And, I kind of use this interchangeably with awakening transformation coach as well. These are two different ways of looking at it. But I like to think of ascension as moving to our next level of evolution. And our next level of evolution in our spiritual life means that we're no longer consumed by our thoughts. We're no longer consumed by our emotions. We have a clear understanding of how to navigate our lives without feeling that we're overcome by our past. And so that's really what spiritual awakening or spiritual truth is getting to know who am I at the level beyond thought, at the level beyond emotion. So you're ascending to your true self. And the same goes for, and again, this is kind of an interchangeable thing. I'll say I'm an awakening transformation coach because we're transforming from the person you thought you were this new understanding that you're beyond any kind of person you could have imagined. And it's more about understanding that there's a divinity to you or a light to you, or however you'd like to say that, there's an essence there that goes beyond these different parts of you. And that's
Oh, that
critical.
sounds beautiful and exciting.
Yes, absolutely. It's 100% important for the healing process to know and really sense and experience that you inside, which typically, we might conceptually say is your soul or your spirit or, something like that. But it's so different when it's felt, right? I mean, it's so different when that is felt than when it's just a conceptual idea in our minds.
Now we have people here from all over the world, so they follow all different kinds of religions. Is this separate and apart from any religious belief?
Yes, great question. It absolutely is. And in this space of healing, all religious beliefs are welcome. And also, if you do not, have a religion that you follow, then that's perfectly fine as well. It's 100% open to either. The whole perspective here is to understand that at the root, there's more. So if there's an open mind, or if you have an open mind and you believe that there is a higher power of sorts, or that you know that there's more to who you are than your thoughts and emotions, then that's enough to get started on this
Oh,
journey.
that sounds great.
Yeah.
Well, tell me this. One of the things that I talked about with my moderator is how to know. She's very into this, into the spiritual stuff, and I'm kind of like, okay. But how do we know that we can get actually on that path? I mean, what kind of openness does one need to have to even start?
Yes. Ooh, that is really important. So I like to say it's a calling almost. It's almost like you have a calling to this. And I know for me, I can share a little bit of my experience, and that might help paint a picture a little bit. But I've always been very sensitive, energetically, just feeling a lot, and highly anxious as a child. And then as I grew up, learned how to work with the energies I was feeling, and really truly didn't understand, who I was. And really, I mean, it's kind of odd to ask, when you're in your teens, who am I? But that was a big question for me. I really wanted to know. And I was serious about that. And I was dedicated to finding that out. And so from there, it launched me into this whole, philosophical way of looking at life. And then I turned to Buddhism, and I was also, involved in Christianity. And so there were so many different pathways I took to try to find myself and to figure out who am I really, in this life, and determine that for me, I didn't have to put myself in a certain box to understand myself. And I started opening myself a little more and realized that I'm actually connected to the whole. And there's this, it's almost like this integration that happens as we start to heal our different parts of us. And for me, it's almost as if, and one way of thinking of it is, I was ready when I was tired of suffering, first and foremost. And it was also ready to do this work. And that's another way to know, is when I realized that I wanted nothing more than to discover who I am. That was one of the most important things, and that superseded anything else. And from there, that's when, I was a true seeker at that point. That's when I decided that I was ready to do the deeper work. And it led me to discovering this way of healing.
Do
So
you find
in
that
a
some
very,
people avoid this because they're actually afraid of what they may uncover?
yes, I hear that a lot. I do
Oh,
hear that
really?
a lot. Yes, people will tell me, this sounds interesting. I'm really, ready to get started with you, but what if I find out some things that I didn't want to know? What if it's scary? What if I can't handle it? Things of that nature. And usually what I tell them is that we always take things slow in this work. So it's not thrown on them, to the point where they have to start feeling everything,
Right.
but that basically there is a resilience within. And that if you're questioning whether you can handle finding out the information, that's a good sign that your inner child is just asking for some more reassurance. It's just asking for more compassion to go on this journey. So that's
So,
usually what,
Amy, tell
yeah.
me, okay, after someone does all this, this work, and they delve in and they start doing this healing, what's
Yeah.
on the other side? So,
Mhm.
people are gonna be afraid. But
Yeah.
what's the pot at the end of the rainbow?
Yes, that is important, because when we know that, then we're more willing to do the journey, right? Which makes sense. Yes. So, on the other end of things, it's basically a completely transformed outer life, and the way you feel is completely transformed. So, I can talk about how you feel inwardly first, which is more spacious, more expansive, more loving, more joyful, more in tune and aligned and balanced and grounded. So that's what it feels like inside. Now, what it looks like outside is, naturally, when we work from the inside out, it affects our relationships positively. So let's say your relationship with your partner improves, your friends, your colleagues, everybody, it improves. And also, it improves your relationship with money and the way that you see the world, because now there's a deep trust in the universe. It also improves your health, because if you're having any kind of health, ailments or chronic pain of any sort, that, could potentially be connected to your inner child and connected to that wounding, that when that's cleared up, your health just improves exponentially. And in a whole here, your lifestyle might change in the way that you see life, and the things that you might try might be something different than before. Let's say you always wanted to go backpacking, but you never did because it was scary, and now you feel more fearless, you feel braver, you feel more courageous. And of course, first and foremost, your spiritual life improves, because you feel connected to the whole of life instead of separate from it. And that's the big, really big shift, I would say.
Oh, that's excellent. I love it. Well, let me give you a few minutes to, kind of sum things up, and
Yeah.
then, and then be sure to share where we can find more information about you. And I'll put the link to any website that you have in the show description as well.
Okay, perfect. So, to sum things up, I would say first and foremost, we all have an inner child, and this inner child carries these wounds. And these wounds determine how we respond and react in our everyday lives. It affects all areas of our lives and what we're doing, whether or not we notice it or whether or not we know that it's happening. And that while the journey can be scary, because I think we pinpointed that pretty well, that it doesn't have to be incredibly triggering. It doesn't have to be really, really difficult to do this work. Now, there is a dedication to it and an open mindedness that's required, but just any kind of commitment is all about taking that first step. So that's what that looks like. And as far as where to find me or to get more information about this process, you can visit my website, and that's ONE awakening.com. And I also have a Facebook group. It's called Awakening Spiritually Together. And I can give you the link for that too, because it's a little bit of a longer one. So you can place it down below. So that way everyone's not scrambling to try to figure out what that might be. But I would encourage you to join that group, because even if you are just coming into your spirituality or unsure about it or just curious, it's a beautiful, supportive online community that we have there. And it might really help you to feel like you're not alone on this journey. So I
Oh, that's
recommend.
beautiful.
Yes, yes. And one quick thing too is I do have a free spiritual awakening guidebook for any of you who want to get started on this journey and start the healing process. And so I'd be happy to provide that link as well down below. And yeah, we can go from there. And I think that that would be so important to begin getting to know those different parts of you, the subpersonalities, like your inner child and critic. And then you can start the healing process and truly get to know who you are.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. Thanks so much, Amy, for stopping through. I will be sure to, once I get all this up, send you the link to it so that you can admire yourself when it
Oh,
goes live, and criticize yourself just like all the rest of us do. Like, why did I say that? Look at that face I made. Ew.
all love right now. It's all about love every
Oh,
time.
yeah, it's loving. I'm just making jokes.
Oh, that's
I just
great.
being silly.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, and we'll be in touch.
All right. Sounds great.
All right, everybody, that is Amy. Excuse my blindness for messing up her name. Amie Dean, talking about healing and doing the work to on your inner child and bringing everything together, feeling better about who you are as a woman. And it's kind of a foundational thing. I wish I would have been able to put this earlier in the month, but it doesn't matter. It's here, and so you can re-listen to the video and take some of the tips away. She gave some very good suggestions for how to get started and things to think about. And of course, you can reach out to her if you'd like a little bit more help. And stay tuned, because we got another show coming up tomorrow. And as we wind down to the end of February 2022. I'll see you guys tomorrow.